What's up, guys? This is Post-Production Pie with S1Knowledge.com, and I want to give you guys a little bit of preliminary thoughts on the Lightroom 4 beta so far. Now, this past week I made a comment that basically I'm kind of disappointed with the overall improvement in Lightroom 4, just because I felt like there wasn't that much as far as functionality improvements to the actual develop module itself, which I feel like is really the core of Lightroom. Adobe has made quite a few adjustments to the software, especially when it comes to handling video files and being able to do some editing with the video files. When it comes to two new modules, one for map and book for geotagging as well as creating books, which is going to be really cool. But what we're going to be focusing on this is really what changes are being made to the actual functionality in editing in the develop module. So let's talk about that. Again, this is Lightroom 4 beta, and Adobe does make it perfectly clear that this is only a preview of some of the features to come and not all, which it gives me a little bit of hope, but we'll see what happens. So let's jump into the develop module, and the first and most probably broad change is changes to the actual basic panel right here. We have major changes to the layout as well as the actual functions themselves, as well as the actual sliders. You notice that contrast is actually brought now right below exposure. And we have 4 new sliders, one for highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. Now, when you first see this, it might be really frustrating because you're like, okay, why is Adobe changing this standard? But, I mean, we were kind of used to the whole exposure brightness thing. But, I remember countless times explaining what the difference is between exposure and brightness, and, what exactly is recovery and what exactly is, fill light. We had to do a lot of explaining, and there's specific chapters in our Lightroom A to Z guide that just discuss what each of those items are. This new system is actually much more intuitive, and it's going to be really great. You still have exposure, still works the exact same way, contrast still works the same way, but the unique thing is that highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks now do they're very intuitive. Basically, if you drag the highlights up, you are brightening your highlights. If you drag it down, you are pulling down your highlights. Same thing with shadows. If you drag shadows up, you're brightening your shadows. This is essentially your fill light. This is essentially your recovery. You have even more control over specifically the whites and the blacks. If you drag your whites up, it's pumping up the whites in the image, and you have blacks again, where if you drag the blacks up, you're increasing the blacks or decreasing the blacks based on where you go. They kind of function the same way. But now we actually have white control as well. So between these 4 adjustments, you have much more control and more intuitive control over the exposure of your image. It's essentially taking your tone curve and giving a slider to each level, to each region of this tone curve, and putting it into your basic panel, which is really nice. It's going to be a really nice feature. It's going to be very intuitive and really help in explaining and kind of just understanding how the basic panel and the exposure adjustments are going to work. So that's a great adjustment there. Now, when it comes to the tone curve, when it comes to basically everything else, split toning, detail, most everything else is the exact same, which is kind of a little bit disappointing. There's not anything new as far as any other controls. The one other additional area that they're adding a little bit of features to is the functionality as far as the brushes and local area adjustments go. So if we click on the adjustments brush, we notice that we have the different controls for the new sliders. We have that. We also have a moire adjustment, which is basically that weird kind of sharpening effect that you get over patterns on DSLRs, from video as well as on stills. We get kind of this nasty, distracting sharpening effect, which is called moire. So you can actually control that and have adjustments over that. Everything else is pretty much the same. A local noise adjustment is really nice to be able to have, and some of these other new local adjustments are nice to have, like the shadows and highlight controls and stuff like that. But most of it is pretty much identical to Lightroom 3. Now, here's some of the frustrating side. We don't really have that much more local area adjustment control, and one of the things that I was really dying for is the ability to be able to sync adjustment brush settings over different photos, like to be able to set up presets for that. But if you notice, if we go to add a new preset, we don't have the brush adjustments available still in this preset, in creating the preset panel. So still, local area adjustments like brush settings and stuff like that cannot be applied to multiple images. They can't be created in presets, which creates a lot of limitations. Like if you want to create, for example, I wanted to create these vintage effects where it has, things like edge softening and things like, kind of the Olga effects, like where it's has that kind of overall softening effect applied to the image, or images like the lens baby effect where you have a tilt shift effect, or all that kind of stuff. You need to be able to create presets with local area adjustments with the brushes and the graduated filter adjustments. We see graduated filter adjustments, but there are no brush adjustment options for presets. Hopefully that's going to change in the final version. It's kind of disappointing to see that that's not in here. Now the next thing, if we go and we look at like the spot removal tool, we have no additional control over spot removal. We can't do any additional cloning, any additional healing. We can't change the shape of the brush. We can't do any like kind of brushing and masking and that kind of stuff that you would in Photoshop. I think the reason for this is really to keep Lightroom independent of Photoshop and to make sure that there's still a need for users to be able to pull things into Photoshop. It'd be great if those things were added to Lightroom, but I don't see it happening with Lightroom 4. Aside from that, there's not really any other adjustments. Cropping, everything else works the exact same way. The develop module for the most part is identical in every other way to Lightroom 3, and that's what's a little bit disappointing, is that I was really looking forward to Adobe beefing up the develop module, and that hasn't happened yet. So hopefully it'll happen with the release version. Keeping our hopes up, Adobe, but we'll see what happens.